Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and this is the Italian American Stories podcast. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Mom and we could not get our schedules to work for this episode, so I am flying solo today, but I just wanted to put out a quick episode for Valentine's. I have a few articles that are kind of lovey-dovey, so I figured why not make an episode for Valentine's Day? So this will kind of be like our Tales of the Archives, just tiny little articles that can't really be turned into a full story. So the first love story comes from the New York Herald and is dated August 2nd, 1879. And the headline reads, "How a modern Romeo and Juliet fled from Italy and met again in Jefferson Market and Police Court." So the two lovebirds involved in this story are Edward Zola and Adeline Ochetti. And the two, they came from very affluent families in Italy, and they lived on neighboring estates in Italy. So they basically just grew up together. And the families, they were really close at one point, but because of politics, the two families grew apart. And so Edward and Adeline, they were told that they could not go forward with their marriage. So at some point, the families agreed that the two should marry, but after the politics feud, it was said that they could not get married. So the two of them, they decided that they would run away to America. And once in America, the two, for some reason, they didn't marry right away, but instead they got an apartment together. And remember, this is the 1800s, so this is considered kind of scandalous here. The apartment, though, it was described as like Edward bought 3 rooms, so I'm not sure if they actually stayed in the same apartment together. I don't know. I don't know. The paper just described it as Edward rented 3 rooms for the two of them, whatever that means. But the two, they seemed to be pretty happy in America for a while. They were living off of the money that they took with them and were enjoying being in America. However, their money started to run out and the two had to find work to survive. And based off of the articles I read, I don't think either of them had ever worked before. So this was definitely a new lifestyle for them. But they would only have to work for a few years because at this time, Edward was 27, but on Edward's 30th birthday, he was to inherit 80,000 francs, which, thanks to ChatGPT for doing the conversions for me, this is worth about $600,000 in today's US dollar. So that's a pretty substantial amount of money. So I think they were kind of buckling down, just trying to get through the next 3 years. And then they knew like basically their life would change. But the two, they were not exactly happy to be working. Like I said earlier, I'm not sure they ever worked a day in their life before. And Edward, he started to feel like maybe Adeline was falling out of love with him. And he started to get a little bit jealous because keep in mind, they were spending all of their days together before they had to work. And now they're basically just seeing each other in the evenings. And you come home, you're tired, you're not super chatty. And so Edward started getting a little worried about this. Because of this, they started fighting and their fights escalated. And poor Adeline, she actually became kind of afraid of him and eventually left the apartment to go live with friends. But Edward found her the next day and begged her to come back to him. When she resisted, Edward took it a little too far and actually threatened to kill her if she didn't return home with him. So Adeline went back to their apartment that night with him. However, the next day, she took off again. And this time, Edward, he could not convince her to come back. And it just makes me wonder what that night was like for her to agree to come back and the next morning she's gone again. But Edward, he worked really hard to try to get her back. He would write letter after letter to her, professing his love and basically begging her to come back. However, also included in these letters were threats to kill her. So that's not good. And eventually, Adeline, she got sick of the letters and she was scared. So she took the letters to the police department and the police, after reading the letters, went and arrested Edward. And the two of them, they had a court hearing. And during this hearing, kind of at the beginning of it, Edward proclaimed that they could just get married right then and there. Since they're already at the courthouse, why not? Let's just solidify this. And Adeline looked at him and promptly said, no. Which that seems like a good idea. So after the hearing, the judge agreed to let Edward go with a warning to stay away from Adeline. And Edward became upset, and the paper said, quote, "He trembled like a leaf and cried like a boy." And apparently the judge at this point told him that he did this to himself and he needs to be kinder if he ever wants to find somebody in the future. And a reporter actually asked the judge if he thought Edward would hurt Adeline. And the judge said, quote, "If a murder happens, we will find the murderer and bring him to justice." So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I think about that response, but anyways. A few days later, on September 2nd, 1897, Edward, he actually convinced Adeline to marry him. So we're talking about a month later. So they once again entered the courthouse. However, this time they were with some friends and they got married. So I just hope that they lived happily ever after and were able to work out all of these issues. But our next story is from Leadville, Colorado, and it was published in the Herald Democrat on April 6, 1900. So a Philip Corsoni and Tony Materni came to America from the same region in Italy around the late 1800s, and they came to Leadville because they wanted to work in the mines. However, these two were not super great friends, and there had always been tension between them, and this tension was actually due to the fact that they were both in love with the same woman, which is not great for a friendship. So the story goes that when the two men were in Italy, they were courting the same girl. And this girl, she actually came from a very wealthy family in Italy. Her father was a wine merchant, and he didn't approve of the two men courting his daughter. And according to the article, the girl, she really didn't have a preference for either boy. She was basically like, I'm good marrying either one of them. So her father actually stepped in at this point and told the two boys that the first one who could produce 5,000 lire, which is $40,000 in today's US dollar, could marry her. And that's a lot of money. So the two decided that, hey, we have to go to America if we want to make this kind of money. They took off and headed to America to make their fortune. Well, in April of 1900, Philip had saved enough money and was headed back to Italy for his bride. But his only concern was that he had not seen Tony in a while. So he was in a real hurry to get back because he feared that Tony might have beat him back to Italy. And sadly, I don't know what happened. I couldn't find anything else. So I don't know who got the girl, but hopefully whoever did, they lived happily ever after. So our next story, it takes place in Leominster, Massachusetts. And I'm actually just going to read this article because it sums it up really nice and it's pretty cute. So the headline reads, "A romance of 20 years unites two Italians. Sweethearts in the homeland are married now in the United States." A romance of childhood and the story of love that has survived through 20 years has come to light with the marriage in Leominster, Massachusetts of Savario Bellata and Miss Coraline, who have carried out their childhood pledge to have a house in America someday, a promise that was sealed with a kiss in the little railroad station in Bianco, Italy. The two families owned adjoining places in Italy, and the children of each family were playmates, particularly Savario and Coraline. In 1903, Savario, then but only 14 years old, bade his friends and family goodbye and started for the New World. A last promise to little Coraline was that someday she would come to America to be his wife. Since that time, they corresponded until the letter which told Coraline that Savario was ready to fulfill his promise and would be waiting at the pier for her. Savario met her at Ellis Island, he brought her to Leominster, and today they are happy in each other's love. But with that article, I thought we would end because that one was pretty sweet. Well, I hope everyone has a great Valentine's Day, and there's not a whole lot of pictures to post, but I think I have one picture of Edward Zola that I could post up. So again, I hope everyone has a great Valentine's Day. Please subscribe, rate, follow our podcasts wherever you listen, and I hope you enjoyed listening to our Valentine's Day special, and I hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time.